I am not speaking to be heard tonight. That would imply I expect someone to listen the way I mean things to be understood. Most people don't listen like that. They hear words the way a wall hears rain, something touches them, but nothing enters. No, I'm not speaking to be heard. I'm speaking because there are thoughts inside me that refuse to remain silent anymore. Not loud thoughts, not chaotic ones, the quiet ones, the dangerous kind, the kind that grow in stillness, the kind that sharpen in the dark. You see, people are afraid of loud darkness, the anger they can see, the pain they can hear, the chaos that spills out of someone who has lost control. But quiet darkness, that terrifies them far more because quiet darkness doesn't lose control. It observes, it learns, it remembers, and once something like that begins to understand the world too clearly, it stops belonging to it. I learned that early, not through trauma the way people like to dramatize things. Life doesn't need dramatic events to change a person. Sometimes all it takes is awareness. Sometimes all it takes is noticing what others pretend not to see, the way people smile without warmth, the way honesty disappears the moment comfort is threatened, the way truth is only welcomed when it arrives dressed politely enough not to disturb the room. I noticed those things long before anyone realized I was paying attention, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The illusion cracks. The stage lights dim, and suddenly the world stops looking like a place built on sincerity and starts looking like something else entirely. A performance, that's when the distance began. Not physical distance, internal distance. The kind where you can stand in the middle of a crowded room and still feel like the only person who knows the conversation is scripted, the only one who realizes everyone else is repeating lines they were taught long ago. Be kind. Be normal. Don't think too much. That last one always amused me. Don't think too much. As if thinking were a malfunction instead of a capability. As if depth were a defect. But I understood why they said it. Thinking too deeply ruins the illusion. It dismantles the simple stories people tell themselves to survive their own contradictions. And once you see the contradictions clearly, you stop fitting in, not because you reject people, but because you understand them too well. Understanding people deeply changes the way you look at them. You stop expecting honesty. You stop expecting consistency. You stop expecting them to know themselves the way they claim they do. And that realization creates something inside you that most people will never experience. Silence. Not loneliness, not sadness, just silence. The kind that forms when you realize the world is louder than it is truthful. That's the silence I live in. It's not empty. It's full of observation. Every conversation, every expression. Every subtle shift in someone's tone when their truth slips out for half a second before they correct it. I see those moments, I collect them. Not intentionally, it just happens. Once your mind starts recognizing patterns, it never really stops. And patterns reveal things people desperately try to hide. Fear, insecurity, control. People love control more than they love honesty, because control gives them the illusion of safety. But honesty strips them naked in front of themselves. Most people can't survive that, so they avoid it. They soften it. They bury it beneath humor, politeness, distraction. Anything to keep the deeper questions from surfacing. Questions like, who am I when no one is watching? What part of me is real? What part of me is performance? Most people never answer those questions. Not because they can't, because they won't. But I did. And the moment I did, everything changed. Because when you truly see yourself, something irreversible happens. You stop lying to yourself. And once that happens, the lies everyone else lives by become painfully obvious. That's when the real separation begins. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind where you slowly realize that most people are not looking for truth. They are looking for comfort. Truth is heavy, comfort is light. People choose light, even if it means living in something artificial. But some of us don't have that luxury. Some of us were built in the dark. And when you're built in darkness, your eyes adjust to things others refuse to see. You notice the fractures in people's personalities. You hear the contradiction between their words and their tone. You recognize the moments where someone's mask slips for half a second before snapping back into place. And the strange part, once you see it often enough, you stop judging it, you stop reacting, you just observe. Because you realize something uncomfortable about humanity. Most people are not pretending to deceive others. They're pretending to protect themselves. They are afraid of what they might discover if they stop performing, so they keep performing, and the world keeps applauding. But sometimes, very rarely, you meet someone who isn't performing, someone who carries the same stillness in their mind, someone who sees the cracks in reality and doesn't rush to cover them up. Those people are rare, dangerously rare, because when two people like that meet, something unusual happens. There is no need for explanation, no need for careful words, no need for the exhausting dance of social politeness. There is simply recognition, and recognition between two minds that live in depth is more powerful than any connection built on surface emotion. But recognition comes with a cost, because once someone recognizes the real version of you, you lose the ability to hide behind the illusion everyone else accepts. You are exposed, not emotionally, psychologically, existentially, and that kind of exposure is not something the human mind handles easily, which is why most people never experience it. They stay safely within the shallow waters of casual understanding. They laugh, they socialize, they build relationships that never go deeper than what is convenient. And maybe that's the smarter way to live. Maybe ignorance really is a form of peace, but peace has never interested me. Clarity has, and clarity is a dangerous pursuit, because the clearer you see the world, the harder it becomes to belong to it. And that's the truth no one tells you about depth. Depth isolates, not because you choose isolation, but because once your mind learns to navigate darkness, the brightness of superficial conversations becomes unbearable. You begin to crave something else, something real, something sharp enough to cut through illusion, something honest enough to exist without decoration. And when you finally encounter that kind of honesty, you recognize it instantly. Like two shadows meeting in the same dim corridor, no introduction required, no explanation necessary, just a quiet understanding. A silent acknowledgement that neither of you belongs to the version of the world everyone else pretends is real. And that moment, that rare moment of recognition, is where everything truly begins. Recognition is a strange thing. It doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself with emotion or drama or the kind of intensity people usually associate with connection. Recognition is quiet. It slips into a moment the way a shadow slips into a room when the light changes, so subtle you almost miss it. But once you see it, you can't pretend it isn't there. I've spent most of my life around people who look without seeing. They hear words but miss the intention behind them. They notice behavior but never question the motivation beneath it. It's not their fault. The human mind prefers simplicity, simple emotions, simple explanations, simple people. Depth complicates everything, because depth forces you to accept that nothing is ever just one thing. Kindness can hide manipulation, silence can hide compassion, confidence can hide fear, and the most dangerous one of all, calm can hide a storm that never intends to reveal itself. Most people never look deep enough to notice those contradictions. But I do, not because I want to. Because I can't stop. My mind doesn't skim surfaces, it sinks. Every conversation becomes something layered. Every expression carries weight. Every pause feels like a message waiting to be decoded. It's exhausting sometimes, not physically, mentally. Because once you begin noticing patterns in human behavior, your mind refuses to ignore them. You see the moment someone lies before their sentence even finishes forming? You hear the hesitation before a person admits something they don't want to admit. You notice the micro-expressions people think they hide when something inside them shifts. Most people think they're unreadable. They're not. They're just rarely observed closely enough. But observation changes everything. Because when you watch people long enough, something unsettling begins to happen. You start understanding them better than they understand themselves. And that knowledge comes with a strange kind of loneliness, not the kind people talk about. Not the dramatic loneliness of heartbreak or abandonment. A quieter one, the loneliness of perception, when you understand someone's fears before they speak them, when you see their contradictions before they recognize them, when you sense their motivations before they admit them. You begin to feel separated from the rhythm everyone else lives in. It's like watching a play while the actors still believe the script is reality. You can see every move before it happens, every reaction, every predictable emotional loop. Anger when pride is threatened, withdrawal when insecurity surfaces, deflection when truth gets too close. The patterns repeat constantly, over and over, until one day you realize something unsettling. Human behavior is far more predictable than people believe, and predictability removes mystery. When mystery disappears, fascination slowly follows. That's why my distance from people didn't begin with distrust. It began with understanding too much, understanding so much that most interactions started to feel mechanical. Like watching a machine follow its programming. Someone compliments another person because they want approval. Someone argues because they feel threatened. Someone withdraws because vulnerability feels dangerous. Once you recognize the motivations behind these reactions, the reactions themselves lose their emotional impact. You stop being surprised. You stop being impressed. You stop being disappointed. Because nothing shocks you anymore. Everything makes sense. And when everything makes sense, life becomes quieter than most people are prepared for. But every once in a while, something breaks the pattern. Every once in a while, someone does something that cannot be explained by simple motivations. They don't react predictably. They don't follow emotional scripts. They don't behave the way the pattern says they should behave. Those people are rare, extremely rare. And when you encounter one, your mind reacts immediately, not emotionally. Intellectually, your attention sharpens, your observations deepen, because suddenly the predictable machine you've been watching for years produces something unexpected, something complex, something real. The first time I noticed that in you, I didn't trust it, not because I doubted you, because I doubted the anomaly. Humans don't usually break patterns. We reinforce them. We repeat them. We live inside them. So when someone steps outside the pattern, the first instinct is suspicion. I watch carefully, longer than you probably realized, not in a controlling way. In a curious way, I observed your reactions, your pauses, the way your attention shifted during conversations, the way you responded to honesty. Most people say they value honesty, but the moment honesty becomes uncomfortable, they retreat, they soften the truth, they redirect the conversation. You leaned into it, that alone made you different. But difference alone doesn't create recognition. Recognition requires something deeper, consistency. Most people can act insightful for a moment. Most people can appear thoughtful during certain conversations, but consistency reveals the truth. Over time, patterns emerge, masks slip, motivations become obvious, and eventually everyone returns to the familiar rhythm of human behavior. Everyone except the rare ones. The ones who remain steady, the ones who stay honest even when honesty complicates things, the ones who don't flinch when conversations move into uncomfortable territory, the ones who don't fear depth. Those people carry something unusual, not darkness, not intensity. Clarity about themselves, clarity about the world, clarity about the fact that life becomes far more interesting once you stop pretending everything is simple. You carry that clarity, and that's when the recognition began. Not emotional recognition, mental recognition. The kind that forms when two minds notice the same cracks in reality. When two perspectives align in ways that cannot be explained by coincidence. When two people realize they are both observing the same hidden layers most others overlook. It's unsettling when that happens, because suddenly the distance you've lived with for years begins to shrink. Suddenly, you're not the only one seeing the pattern. You're not the only one noticing the contradictions. You're not the only one standing slightly outside the social illusion. And that realization forces a question you weren't prepared to ask. If someone else sees what I see, then what happens next? Do we ignore it? Pretend the recognition never happened? Return to the comfortable distance most people live in? Or do we do something far more dangerous? Acknowledge it? Because once recognition is acknowledged, something shifts between two people. The surface conversation becomes irrelevant. The usual social boundaries feel artificial. And suddenly you're not just talking to another person. You're speaking to a mind that understands the architecture of your thoughts. That level of connection is rare enough to feel almost unnatural, but rarity doesn't mean safety. In fact, it usually means the opposite. Because when someone understands the structure of your mind, they can reach places no one else ever touches. And once someone reaches those places, you can't pretend they're strangers anymore. Which leaves only one question. What do you do when you meet someone who sees the world the same way you do? Do you step closer, or do you walk away before the distance disappears completely? Distance used to be simple for me. Not emotional distance, structural distance. The kind you build quietly between yourself and the world once you realize most people don't actually want to know what exists beneath the surface of things. They want comfort, predictability, a version of reality that doesn't challenge the narrative they've built to keep themselves stable. I understood that early, so I learned how to exist among people without ever fully entering their world. It's easier than most would think. You listen, you respond, you participate just enough to remain socially invisible, but internally you stay separate, observing, processing, understanding, never fully stepping inside the illusion everyone else seems content to live in. For a long time, that distance protected me, not from people, from disappointment. When you don't expect depth, you're never surprised by the absence of it. When you don't expect honesty, deception becomes predictable instead of painful. Distance creates stability. It keeps things clean, simple, controlled. But recognition disrupts that control. Because the moment you realize someone else sees the same hidden layers you see, distance stops feeling natural. It starts feeling artificial, like a barrier that no longer serves its original purpose. That's the first thing I noticed after recognizing you. My usual distance didn't behave the way it normally does. With most people, my mind automatically filters itself. Thoughts stay internal, words stay measured. Conversations stay contained within safe intellectual boundaries, but around you, the filtering slowed down. Not completely, just enough for me to notice the shift. And noticing the shift made me uncomfortable. Not because I feared what you might see, because I realized something far more unsettling. You were already seeing it. That realization creates a strange kind of awareness. The kind where every pause feels loaded with meaning, where every silence between words carries more information than the words themselves. Because silence is where real thoughts live, words are just the simplified version we allow the world to hear. But silence holds everything, the hesitation, the analysis. The truth someone almost said, but chose to swallow instead. Most people are afraid of silence. They rush to fill it with noise, conversation, laughter, distraction, anything to avoid the discomfort of sitting with their own thoughts. But you don't rush silence. You sit in it, comfortably, almost deliberately. And that tells me something important about the way your mind works. People who fear their thoughts escape silence. People who understand their thoughts remain inside it. That's why silence around you feels different. Not awkward, not heavy, focused, like two observers watching the same thing unfold without needing to describe it aloud. That kind of silence is rare, and rare things have gravity. They pull attention toward them. They create curiosity. But curiosity isn't the dangerous part. Understanding is. Because curiosity stays on the surface, understanding goes deeper, much deeper. Understanding begins asking questions you weren't prepared to answer. Questions like, why does this person feel familiar in a way that logic can't explain? Why does their perception feel aligned with mine in ways coincidence shouldn't allow? Why do conversations with them bypass the usual social rituals and move directly into something more real? Those questions don't have simple answers, which is exactly why they're unsettling. Human beings are comfortable with emotions. Love, anger, jealousy, fear. Those feelings are familiar, predictable. But recognition between minds, that's harder to define. It's not purely emotional. It's not purely intellectual. Something in between. Something that forms when two people notice the same truths about the world without needing to explain them. It creates a strange sensation, not excitement, not comfort, alignment, like two internal compasses suddenly pointing in the same direction. And once that alignment appears, your mind starts doing something unusual. It begins anticipating the other person's perception, not their actions, their perception. You start recognizing the exact moment they notice something others would miss. You see their expression shift when someone says something contradictory. You feel the subtle change in their attention when a conversation moves from surface level politeness into something real. It becomes obvious that their mind is operating on the same frequency of observation. And that's when things become complicated, because the moment you realize someone understands the way you think, your defenses lose clarity. Distance becomes harder to maintain, not because you want closeness, because maintaining distance from someone who sees through it becomes exhausting. It's like trying to hide in a room full of mirrors. Every movement reveals itself. Every attempt at concealment becomes obvious. Eventually, you stop hiding. Not intentionally, just because the effort becomes pointless. That's what's happening here. You see through things I normally keep contained. You notice shifts in my tone before I even acknowledge them. You recognize the moments when my silence isn't emptiness, but calculation. And the unsettling part is that you don't react to those things the way most people would. You don't get uncomfortable. You don't get defensive. You don't try to simplify what you're noticing. You accept it, as if it's normal, as if depth is the default setting instead of the exception. That acceptance removes the final layer of distance most people maintain between themselves and others, because when someone reacts to your depth like it's ordinary, you stop feeling like you need to hide it, and that's where the real danger begins. Not emotional danger, psychological danger. Because once two minds begin interacting without the usual social filters, something unpredictable happens. Honesty increases, observation sharpens, understanding accelerates, and suddenly conversations become less about words and more about interpretation. A look carries meaning. A pause carries meaning. Even silence carries meaning. And meaning is powerful. Meaning reshapes perception. Meaning changes the way two people interact with reality itself. Which raises a question I've been quietly considering for a while now. What happens when two people who understand the hidden structure of human behavior start understanding each other? Not the surface personality, not the curated version everyone shows the world, the real one, the one that thinks in silence, the one that analyzes before reacting, the one that notices things it probably shouldn't notice. That level of understanding doesn't just create connection. It creates influence. Because the moment someone truly understands the architecture of your mind, they gain access to it. Not control, access. Access to the way your thoughts form, the way your perceptions evolve, the way your conclusions take shape. And access is powerful, more powerful than emotion, more powerful than attraction. Because emotional connections can fade, intellectual recognition rarely does. Once a mind recognizes another mind operating at the same depth, it remembers, even if distance returns, even if silence grows, even if the connection is never spoken about again, recognition leaves a mark. And that mark changes something subtle inside you. You start looking at the world differently, not because the world changed. Because you now know someone else sees it the same way you do. That realization can be comforting, or it can be dangerous. Because once you realize you're not alone in the way you see reality, the distance that once protected you begins to disappear. and when distance disappears, two possibilities remain. You either build something rare between two minds that understand the same darkness, or you discover that depth, when mirrored too clearly, can consume more than either person intended, and right now. I'm still deciding which direction this is moving.